I smiled at my own reflection in the bathroom mirror of the venue, and it wasn't the kind of smile anyone would have expected from me that day. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't excitement. It was the smile of someone who already knew how the evening was going to end and had made peace with it. My brother's rehearsal dinner was supposed to be the happiest night of the year for my family. 60 guests, an open bar, a venue that cost more per hour than I made in a week at my first job out of college. My parents had spared nothing for my brother, the way they always had, the way they always would. I adjusted the strap of my dress, tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, and walked back out into the noise. I should back up. My name is Waverly. I'm 31 years old. I work in healthcare administration. Unglamorous, necessary, the kind of job people nod politely about at parties before turning to talk to someone more interesting. I live alone in a 2-bedroom condo in Charlotte, North Carolina, on the 14th floor of a building with a doorman named Curtis who always has the Weather Channel on and always asks about my weekend. I bought my condo 4 years ago, saved for 6. Ate a lot of sad desk lunches, skipped a lot of vacations, drove my car until the check engine light became essentially decorative. It is mine, every square foot of it. My name on the deed, my name on the mortgage, my name on the mailbox downstairs. I want to be very clear about that, because it matters later. My brother, whose name is Donovan, is 35. He is also the person my parents have, for as long as I can remember, treated like the sun around which the rest of us orbited. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I've done enough therapy to understand the dynamics, to name them, to set them down on a table and look at them without flinching. But I say it because context is everything, and without it, nothing that happened at that rehearsal dinner makes any sense. Donovan was marrying a woman named wrong list. Her name is Camille. Camille is fine. Camille is fine. She's pleasant in the way that expensive hotels are pleasant. Everything smooth, nothing surprising, nobody asking too many questions. She and Donovan had been together for 2 years. They were moving fast, which my mother had described as romantic, and which I had privately described as concerning. But I had kept that to myself, the way I kept most things. They were renting an apartment in Raleigh, 40 minutes from my condo. It was a decent place. 2 bedrooms, 3rd floor walk-up, the kind of apartment that's perfectly fine when you're starting out. Donovan worked in sales. Camille did something in marketing. Between them, they were comfortable but not settled. That distinction will matter. My parents live in Greensboro in the house I grew up in. My mother taught elementary school for 30 years and recently retired. My father managed a hardware distribution center until his knees gave out. They are not wealthy people. They are people who stretched everything they had to give Donovan every opportunity, and who assumed I would understand, and who were mostly right. I did understand. I just also noticed. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday in April. I drove up alone, told myself I was going to smile and eat the catered salmon and give my toast and drive home. Simple. Contained. Survivable. I had written the toast. 3 minutes exactly. Funny enough to land, warm enough to mean it, short enough to leave people wanting more. I practiced it in my car on the 40-minute drive north, talking to the windshield like a woman who had done this before. I found my seat. My mother hugged me a little too long at the door, which should have been a sign, but I was trying to be generous. My father shook my hand and called me kiddo, which he only does when he's nervous about something. I filed that away. Dinner was served. Wine was poured. Speeches were made by Donovan's college roommates who were funnier than me and knew it. Camille laughed at all the right moments. Donovan looked happy in the way that people look happy when everything is going exactly as planned. And then my mother leaned over to me between the salad course and the entree, and she said, very quietly, as if we were discussing the weather, "We need to talk to you about your condo." I set down my fork. "What about it?" "After dinner," she said. "Not here." She patted my hand and turned back to the table, and I sat there with a glass of Pinot Grigio and a feeling in my chest like a door I hadn't known was open had just been quietly closed. After dinner, they pulled me into a small anteroom off the main hall. One of those venues, rooms meant for crying brides or feuding caterers, my mother, my father, and, to my genuine surprise, Donovan. My father spoke first. He had clearly rehearsed this. Your brother and Camille are going to need a real place to start their life, he said. Something stable. You know how rent is right now. You know what the market looks like. I waited. Your mother and I were thinking, he said. You're young. You're single. You don't really need a two-bedroom. And there it was. I looked at my mother. She was watching me with the careful expression she uses when she's already decided something and is waiting to see how long it takes you to agree. You want me to give Donovan my condo, I said. It was not a question. Not give, my father said. We were thinking more like transfer. You could move somewhere smaller, a one-bedroom maybe. You'd save on the mortgage payment, and Donovan and Camille would have a proper foundation. A foundation, I repeated. You've always been so independent, my mother said, and she meant it as a compliment, and I felt it as something else entirely. You've always been fine on your own. Donovan needs this more right now. I looked at my brother. He had the decency to look at the floor. I need a minute, I said. I walked out of that little room and back into the main hall, which was bright and loud and smelled like gardenias and candle wax. I went to the bar and ordered a club soda because I was driving and because I needed my head completely clear for what came next. I stood at the far end of the room and I thought about the 6 years I'd spent saving, the weekends I'd worked extra shifts, the vacation I hadn't taken, the car I'd driven into the ground. I thought about the 40-minute drive I made every month to have Sunday dinner with people who had just asked me, and my brother's rehearsal dinner to sign over my home so he could have a nicer foundation. I went back. No, I said. My mother blinked. Waverly. No, I said again. That condo is mine. I bought it. I pay the mortgage. My name is on the deed. I'm not transferring it to anyone. You're being selfish, my mother said, and her voice had gone tight. This is your brother's wedding weekend. We're asking you to think about family. I am thinking about family, I said. I'm thinking about the fact that this is the first time in 4 years anyone in this family has expressed any interest in where I live, and the interest is in taking it. My father stepped forward. That's not fair. I'm going back to the table, I said. I'm going to give my toast, and then I'm going to drive home, and this conversation is done. I turned around. My mother's hand came out and closed around my arm, hard. I turned back. You do not walk away from me, she said. And I looked at her, really looked at her, this woman I had spent my entire life trying not to disappoint. And I said, very quietly, let go of my arm, Mom. She didn't. She tightened her grip, and I could feel the eyes of a passing catering staff member flickering toward us and away. You are going to ruin your brother's weekend, she said. He's getting married tomorrow. The least you could do. I removed her hand from my arm. Gently, deliberately. I'm not ruining anything, I said. I'm going back to the table. Please don't follow me. I gave my toast, it landed. I ate the salmon. I drove home. I did not sleep. I lay in my condo, my walls, my kitchen, where I knew where every spoon lived. And I stared at the ceiling, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not just the ask I had half expected in some unexamined part of myself, the way you half expect certain things from people who have shown you who they are for 31 years. But the hand on my arm, the word selfish, the assumption that the correct response to being asked to give up my home was immediate, grateful compliance. I thought about my grandmother on my mother's side. She had died 3 years ago, left me a small inheritance. Not large, but meaningful. $11,000. My parents had suggested gently at the time that it might be nice to put it in a family fund. I had instead used most of it as part of my down payment. They didn't know that. I'd never told them. I also started thinking, lying there in the dark, about what I actually knew. I was 31. I worked in healthcare administration and I had spent 8 years adjacent to lawyers, insurance adjusters, and compliance officers. I understood documentation. I understood what it meant to have things in writing. And I understood with sudden cold clarity that the conversation in that anteroom had been about more than one request. It had been a test, and I had passed it. But passing wasn't enough. The wedding was the next afternoon. I went. I wore the blue dress I had bought specifically for the occasion, and I sat in the fourth row and I watched my brother marry Camille, and I genuinely wished them well. I do not think Donovan is a bad person. I think he is a person who has been taught that things will be arranged for him and who has not yet had a reason to unlearn that. My mother did not look at me during the ceremony. My father squeezed my shoulder at the reception briefly and said nothing. The evening passed the way evenings do when everyone is performing normalcy with considerable effort. I was home by 10. On Monday morning, I called my attorney. Her name is Sandra, and I have used her exactly twice before. Once when I bought my condo, and once when a landlord tried to withhold a security deposit from me in what I can only describe as a profoundly miscalculated move. Sandra is methodical and precise, and charges $300 an hour, which I consider to be among the best money I have ever spent. I told her what had happened. I told her about the request, the language used, the hand on my arm. I told her I wanted to make sure my documentation was airtight. Deed, mortgage, all of it. And I wanted to understand whether there was any legal mechanism by which someone could challenge my ownership of a property I had purchased outright. There was not. Sandra confirmed this clearly and without drama. My condo was mine. It would remain mine. But then she said something I hadn't expected. Have you checked whether anyone has attempted to pull your credit or access records on the property? I had not. I checked. There had been one inquiry, 11 days before the rehearsal dinner. A request for property records on my condo, submitted through a county records office, using information that would only have been available to someone who knew my full name and address. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I called my cell carrier and reviewed my account for any shared plan features or linked accounts. Then I went through the financial accounts I had allowed to receive family correspondence over the years, a joint holiday savings account from when I was 22 that I had forgotten to fully close, a shared streaming subscription. Small things. The kind of small things you don't think about until you do. I closed everything. I also, on Sandra's advice, sent a certified letter to my parents and to Donovan. It was brief and legally precise. It stated that my property at the address in question was solely owned by me, that I had not agreed and would not agree to any transfer of ownership, and that any future attempts to access records, initiate legal inquiries, or involve third parties in any claim regarding said property would be met with immediate legal action. I did not write this letter in anger. I wrote it the way I write anything important, calmly, clearly, with careful attention to what I was actually saying. My mother called me 4 times the week after the wedding. I let 3 of them go to voicemail. The 4th I answered. That letter was completely unnecessary, she said. You made your father feel like a criminal. I made my boundaries clear in a legal document, I said. That's not the same thing. We were just asking, she said. Families ask each other for things. That's what family does. Yes, I said. And I said no. And that should have been the end of it. There was a silence. Donovan is hurt, she said. I know, I said. Camille thinks you don't like her. This isn't about Camille. Another silence. I don't understand you, my mother said finally, and she sounded genuinely bewildered, not cruel, like she was looking at something she had raised and couldn't quite recognize. I know, I said again. I know you don't. We hung up. I had been helping my family financially for years. Not enormously. I'm not a wealthy person, but consistently. A few $100s here when my parents' water heater failed. A plane ticket once when my father needed to travel for a procedure and the timing was tight. Smaller things, grocery runs, co-pays, the occasional bill I quietly covered because it was easier than watching someone stress about it. I stopped. I want to be specific about this because it matters. I did not stop out of revenge. I stopped because I finally understood something I should have understood sooner. That when you are consistently available to subsidize someone else's life while your own resources go unacknowledged and unappreciated, you are not being generous, you are being taken for granted, and taking yourself for granted alongside them. The hardest part was the grief. I hadn't expected grief. I had expected to feel righteous, or relieved, or at least steady. Instead, I felt something that took me a few weeks to identify correctly. I was mourning the family I had wanted us to be, the one where the request in that anteroom never happened, the one where my mother's hand stayed at her side. The one where my father looked at what I'd built and said something like, "Good for you," and meant it. I went to therapy twice in the month after the wedding. My therapist, who is a small woman with an enormous amount of patience, said something that I have thought about almost every day since. "You spent a long time trying to earn a seat at a table that was already set before you arrived." I turned that over for a long time. 3 months after the wedding, I got a text from Donovan. It was short. He said he thought our parents had overstepped. He said he and Camille had found a different apartment, a place they were renting in a neighborhood they actually liked, and that they were figuring it out. He said he was sorry he hadn't spoken up in that room. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with it for 2 days. Then I wrote back, "I appreciate you saying that. Let me know if you want to get coffee sometime." He did. We did. It was awkward and careful and also the most honest conversation we'd had in years. I don't know what we are now. Not close, not estranged, somewhere in the complicated middle where two people who share a history are trying to figure out whether they share a future. I'm okay with that uncertainty. I've made peace with slower things. My mother and I are in what I would describe as a functional detente. She calls on Sundays. I answer about half the time. When I do, we talk about small things, her garden, my work, the weather in Charlotte, which she always seems to find surprising, even though the weather in Charlotte is not particularly surprising. She has not brought up my condo again. I don't know if that means she understands, or if it means she's waiting. I have decided that it doesn't matter, because the answer will be the same either way. My father called me on my birthday in June. He sang half of Happy Birthday before getting embarrassed and stopping, which is exactly what he has done every year since I was 12, and which made me laugh despite myself. At the end he said, "I know things got messy." And I said, "Yeah, they did." And he said, "You're a good kid, Waverly." And I said, "I know, Dad. I do know. My condo is still mine. I painted the second bedroom last fall, a deep, quiet blue that I spent 3 weekends choosing from paint chips, holding them up to the window in different lights, second-guessing and reconsidering and finally deciding. Curtis complimented it when I was hauling the drop cloths to the laundry room and I told him about the whole process, and he said, "That's the color of someone who knows what she wants." And I thought that was one of the better things anyone has said to me in recent memory. I wake up in it every morning. I make coffee in my kitchen. I know where every spoon lives. There are people who will read this and think I overreacted, that families ask each other for things, that the request wasn't so outrageous, that I should have extended more grace, kept the peace, found a way to give a little. I understand that perspective. I don't share it, but I understand it. What I know is this: I spent 6 years building something. And when someone reached for it, not gently, not with acknowledgement of what it had cost me, but with the assumption that my no was simply a negotiating position, I held on. Not out of spite, not out of spite, not out of stubbornness, out of the simple, clear-eyed knowledge that what I had built was worth keeping. If you've ever been told that wanting to keep what you earned makes you selfish, I want you to hear this: it doesn't. Wanting to keep what you built is not selfishness, it is self-respect. And self-respect is not something you owe anyone, no matter whose last name you share. I'm still figuring out who my family is to me and who I am to them. I think that's going to be a longer process than any single conversation in any anteroom at any rehearsal dinner could resolve. But I'm not in a hurry anymore. I stopped being in a hurry the night I drove home from that venue, windows down, alone on the interstate, and felt, underneath all the complicated grief and anger and love, something I hadn't felt in years. Quiet. Mine. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to make a decision that nobody around you agrees with, and to be right anyway. When I drove home from that rehearsal dinner, I wasn't sure I was right. I felt the way you feel after a car accident, shaky, too alert, replaying the sequence of events to figure out if there was something I could have done differently. My mother's hand on my arm, my father's prepared speech, Donovan looking at the floor. I turned it over the whole 40 minutes home, looking for the version where I was the problem. I couldn't find it, and eventually I stopped looking. Here's what I've come to understand: the actions we take and the ones we don't take build on each other in ways we can't always trace in real time. For years, I had been available, financially, emotionally, practically. I had subsidized and absorbed and smoothed things over, and those choices, repeated enough times, had communicated something I never intended to communicate: that my resources, my labor, my silence were a given. Not a gift, a given. So when my parents walked into that anteroom with a request that would have taken 6 years of my life's work and transferred it to my brother, they weren't being malicious in the way we imagine malice. They were following a logic that I had helped, in small ways, to build. The ask was outrageous, but it wasn't random. It was the destination of a road I had partly paved. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. Not the anger, the accountability. I don't think I owe anyone my home. I want to be clear about that. What I built is mine, and saying no to giving it away was right, full stop. But the reason it even became a question in the first place, that's something I had a hand in, and once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. The quiet, persistent willingness to give a little more, to avoid the harder conversation, to prioritize the peace of the room over the truth of the situation. Those choices had consequences I had to live with. What Waverly learned, what I learned, is that self-respect isn't a single dramatic moment. It's 100 smaller ones. It's the bill you stop paying when it was never yours to pay. It's the phone call you let go to voicemail because you already know what it's going to ask of you. It's the certified letter you send, not out of rage but out of clarity, because clarity is the only thing that actually changes anything. Donovan texted me eventually. He apologized. I believe he meant it. But I also know that the apology came after months of silence, after he and Camille figured things out on their own, after it became undeniable that what they had been waiting for wasn't coming. Sometimes people grow into accountability the same way they grow into everything else. Slowly, with resistance, only when there's no other option. I'm not bitter about that. I'm just awake to it. The thing about holding your ground is that it costs something. It costs the version of yourself that was willing to keep absorbing. It costs the comfortable fiction that everything is fine. It costs relationships, at least temporarily, and sometimes longer than that. My mother and I still talk in that careful, surface-level way. My father sang half of Happy Birthday in June and made me laugh. We are not repaired, we are in progress, or possibly in stasis, I'm not always sure which. But my condo is still mine. The second bedroom is that deep blue I spent 3 weekends choosing. Curtis compliments it when he sees me in the laundry room. I wake up every morning in something I built with my own hands, my own time, my own years. And there is nothing, no family peace, no approval, no carefully maintained fiction of harmony, worth trading that for. Keep what you build, say no when you mean it, and understand that the clearest form of revenge is simply refusing to shrink.